Welcome to another episode of Bucket List Coach Web Show Live. Welcome to another episode of Bucket List Coach Web Show Live. If you'd like to comment here on Facebook, go to StreamYard.com/Facebook. A little bit about the show. I actually have a little tie to Navy and a little tie to Air Force. I grew up near Travis Air Force Base, about 5 minutes from Travis, and I always got excited seeing those C5s. I'm probably the only girl that gets excited about C5s. And then later in my early 20s, I worked civil service as a ship fitter on a submarine. So that's my love for the Navy. And of course, the F-14 Tomcat. So the promo for today, subscribe and comment on YouTube at Bucket List Coach Web Show Live. And if you share this very broadcast, either on LinkedIn or on Facebook, I'll gift you a 5-night hotel stay. Simply check out 3nightgiveaway.com. Also, a big plug for National Day Calendar. I'm an ambassador with them. It is National Military Family Month and, of course, National Aviation History Month. If you go to nationaldaycalendar.com and you buy swag, you'll get 20% off. In the code, just type in Cindy Lee, all caps. So today, I got the two Daves on. Dave Bio and Dave. Hey, Joe. How you doing, guys?
We're good. I'm good. We're happy to be here.
Tell your story. Tell your story on how you two met.
Dave?
Go ahead. Oh, okay. We met in Pensacola in 1979 or 1980 when we were both flight students because we had a mutual friend. And we both wanted to go F-14s. It was not a sure thing back then. You had to compete for what you wanted, but we both ended up going F-14s. But I went to the West Coast, and the other Dave went to the East Coast. But we've stayed in touch. I mean, we joined up on cross-country flights. We went to, conferences or whatever every once in a while, and we've stayed in touch all these years.
And I'll have to compliment Dave. He wrote me a letter after his ejection and telling me all about it. And he was a better letter writer than I was. I always meant to write letters, but I could never finish them. And, I was always happy. I'd be walking. I remember distinctly walking to the squadron spaces from the parking lot, and Dave would come out, and we'd always stop because I think you were a class or two ahead of me by the time I got down there, because I spent some time in the Marine Corps. So even though I was senior, I was slower getting through the pipeline. And I'd always ask Dave, okay, what's next for me? Mm-hmm. He always gave me really good insights into the flights and what was hard, what wasn't hard. Because a lot of times you look ahead to what was next in syllabus, you go, how in the hell am I going to do that? But if you talk to other students have been in it, like, yeah, there's ways to get it done. Because every flight was like a final exam, right, Dave?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
And you were competing to get those. In my class, by the time I graduated, there were 2 Tomcat slots. That was it. 1 West, 1 East. That was it. Everybody else was going to go Phantoms. You eventually get to Tomcats, but everybody wanted to get Tomcats right out of flight school.
So, Coach, did you hear that? He was a Marine Corps officer first. That's then awesome. He changed to the Navy and then ended up in Tomcat. So, I mean, talk about a guy whose fate is to end up flying Tomcats in the Navy. You're looking at him. There he is.
Yeah. Well, when I signed up for the Marine Corps, they were planning to get the Tomcat. I actually saw a Tomcat with Marines painted on the side of it at Pax River. And the first class was at the RAG at Miramar when the Commandant said, too expensive. We're having a hard time getting the bombs off it. So we're out. And And I was learning how to be an infantry officer at that point. And I'm like, what? What? But, I ended up, finishing up at Quantico, and I was stuck up in the Pentagon and waiting for my orders to flight school. And it was really backed up because Vietnam had just wound down. They had all these people with guaranteed flight contracts on the Marine Corps side, but they didn't have them on the Navy side. And these naval aviators that worked in the office I was in knew that. And they actually introduced me to the guy that knew Dave, because he was a Navy guy heading down there. And they said, if you want to be in the Navy, they're taking Marines to come over. So I went to work in the morning wearing a blue blazer and khaki pants and a blue shirt. And I was a Marine first lieutenant by then, and walked in the admiral's office, raised my right hand, and instantly I was Lieutenant JG, still wearing the same clothes, and went home. And that other guy said, hey, let's room together down in Pensacola. Let's figure it out. And when we get down there, and he goes, I got a really good friend. We got to look him up. Got him look him up. And it's not easy to find people, and when you don't have cell phones, and this is 1979. And I remember we found you like on the side of the road or something. I don't know. I
thought it was at a party.
At a sign, we'll do anything to fly a Tomcat or something. But I remember we met you on the base or something, and you were giving
we first met at a party.
Yeah, you were giving us a gouge on where to find a place to live, because we were out there looking. We got the non-availability, and we're out there looking for a good apartment complex.
There you go.
So I'm going to pop out, and I want you guys to tell my audience what a Rio is.
Okay.
I think Dave should do that because he's got the book.
Okay, I'll start. A Rio stands for Radar Intercept Officer, and it's the guy in the back seat. And now, ever since the movie Top Gun came out, we can say light goose, and everybody knows what you're talking about. But when the F-14 was designed, the radar was very complex for the time, and they could not automate a lot of function. So they had a guy who was dedicated to operating the radar. And he did a lot of other things also. So I'll hand that over to Heijo and let him fill in the rest of the story.
We were the radar intercept officer, but, they trained the pilots that they actually had to learn. Once they got to the RAG, they had to learn how to do intercepts themselves. So it really was a team effort. You had to set up the radar, and especially the Tomcat's radar had such phenomenal range compared to anything that had ever been conceived before it. You just have this marvelous picture. And the Rio, using basically a Commodore 64 level computer, could put lines which were cosmic, and build a picture of the story or the operating space. And you selected all the weapons. And, the Air Force calls their guys in the back navigators. You really weren't. I don't think we were really the navigators, even though we set up the INS. The pilot really did the navigation. If you had the INS set up right, he was looking at the TAC and figuring out where you were.
Well, see, that's something I thought the Navy did well. It was, a crew concept. They told you the Rio talks on the radio. And as you say, the pilot was certainly able to do that. But by convention, the Rio did the radio talking. Same thing with navigation. Yeah, a lot of times the pilots were just navigating by themselves. But, the Rio was assigned responsibility, stuff like that. So,
well, I know a lot of times, especially you mentioned the North Atlantic, we had bears and all sorts of strange stuff coming down the Kola Peninsula every day. And you would you'd start looking, and the radar would just pick them up right at extreme range because they're such radar targets. There's nothing else to look at up there north. And, I'd pick up the target, and right away I'd see the pilot moving the airplane. He'd be moving the nose because he knew where the nose had to be to pick up an intercept course. And, if we had it set up right for him, he had a little repeater display in the front. He couldn't manipulate the radar at all, except for a couple hot modes. But we were really, doing all the different modes, and maybe we messed around with the Soviets a little bit, changing freaks and maybe locking them up, which you're not supposed to do, but maybe it accidentally happened every once in a while.
Yeah, see, I was in the Pacific. See, Dave said he was in the North Atlantic. All my deployments were in the Pacific. And we would see them more on a schedule, twice a week. And it was kind of like they said in Top Gun are we supposed to have visitors today? So, we would expect them about twice a week. They'd come fly by the carrier, and we didn't see nearly the variety that they had. But on the other hand, the weather was warm and the ocean was beautiful. So I'll take that. I accept that trade-off.
Yeah, I'm very envious of that.
Well, see, I wish I would have seen all those Soviet bombers. So
yeah, it was a price to pay. 25-foot seas, green water over the bow.
Man,
MCON. And I tell you, flying at night, you knew that if you had to eject for whatever reason, you probably weren't going to last more than a couple minutes in the water. No way anybody's going to pick you up either.
Terrible.
Wells.
But oh well. Hey, Coach, what are you holding up there?
So let's talk about, first off, this book. What is this about?
Okay, so that is my latest book. It's called Tomcat Rio, and it's like the second half of my career. After I finished being a Top Gun instructor and I went back to the F-14, I had some of my most fun flights. And then later I became a squadron commander, and I had some real challenges. And I talk about that stuff, but I also talk about how the squadron was committed to working hard, doing what it takes, and making it, making our squadron succeed. And of course, we're flying F-14. So, your hard work is rewarded because you get to go out and fly in this fantastic jet.
Let's talk about the F-14.
63 feet long, top speed of 1,600 miles per hour.
Woohoo!
It could either fly for 4 hours if they were real conservative, or they could go through their internal fuel. If they were in full burner at low altitude, they could consume their internal fuel in 8 minutes.
Wow.
Right, Dave? You backing me up on that?
Yeah, probably, because you consume fuel to take off and all that, or especially off the carrier. So you probably didn't even have 8 minutes.
Yeah.
It really, in my whole career, what he explained about the Tomcat was unique, and it had so much internal fuel. It had 16,000 pounds internal, another 4,000 external, 2,000 pound external tanks. So it could carry 20,000 pounds of gas. And, we'd always get a hard time from the Air Force, F-16 pilots or even our fellow Navy guys, but F-15s calling us the aluminum cloud because we were so big. But I tell you, I met an F-16 pilot once. He goes, "You know how big your airplane looks when you're getting gunned by it?" I'm like, well, sounds like you had a problem out there. But, they always assumed because it was big, it wasn't maneuverable, which was not the case. I mean, a lot of it was the people in the cockpit. But if you underestimated a Tomcat flown by someone that really knew how to fly it, like Snort or Oki or any number of guys that really knew what they were doing, it could eat your lunch. And it's gone up against F-16s and MiG-29s, and Slammer Richardson had a famous epic encounter with it was a German MiG-29 that thought he was going to eat his lunch and just got shocked that here's this Tomcat, because it is big, and when you're not used to something that big pointing its nose at you in a real knife fight, we call when you a real dog fight a knife fight, because you're just real tight in there, close quarters, and only one person's going to survive that. In training. Over to Dave.
Well, you're right, man. I don't have anything to add to that. That's pretty much it. I will say a lot of people think of the F-14 as having long-range missile capability, which is true. It did. When it was new, it had the AIM-54 Phoenix, which could go out, pick a number, 40 miles, much longer than that. But as Dave said, it also was designed to have very good maneuverability. And I've recently talked to a bunch of guys who flew the F-14 when it was new, and that is all they wanted to do, because some of them had flown Phantoms, others had just been, were aware of the Phantom. And the Phantom was a great versatile airplane, but it wasn't as good of a dogfighter as the Tomcat. I got to be careful what I say, because I definitely respect the Phantom. Anyway, when the Tomcat came along, these guys go, finally, we got a jet that we can dogfight in. And so that's what they wanted to spend their time doing. And the Tomcat, did very well.
So this is my favorite question. Have you ever buzzed the carrier?
Go.
Well, I'm glad you said that and not the tower, because you really would, unlike the movie Top Gun, you would be in a lot of trouble if you tried, especially at Miramar, or the whole Legacy. There was an admiral once that used out there field day fellows that used to be out there with a radar gun checking the speeds, because there were FAA limitations on how fast you're supposed to go. He would check the altitudes. They actually had lines drawn on the windows. You look out the windows to see how low the guys were. And he also had people checking at the front gate. You weren't supposed to wear your flight jacket or your flight suit, right?
That's true.
The front gate, and you'd have to go see the man if you did. East Coast, it was not quite as anal, but you did not buzz the tower. You didn't risk that. But at sea, it was the captain of the ship was in charge, and the air boss really was his agent to run the whole show, sitting up in his lofty tower. And you could say, permission to do a high speed pass, or if you went up and talked to him beforehand, you could really get pretty creative. And they liked it because it would, the troops would just love it. And you could go as fast as you wanted. In fact, they were like, if you didn't crack a glass in the tower, you considered that you did not win the competition. And they were like, awesome, because a Tomcat coming by at, breaking the speed of sound can really put out a shockwave, and it will fracture the glass in the tower.
Yeah, I remember that happening sometimes. Yes.
Yeah, I was pre-flighting a jet once. I was way underneath it and didn't know that. Usually they would announce it so all the troops would look, and the Tomcat would come by, and it would have. I wish we had a picture. It'd have a shock cone around it, because if it's really humid out there, the shock wave is dragging like a cone, like a Dixie cup cone behind the airplane. It's just amazing to watch. I get chill bumps thinking about it, and it's kaboom once they come by. And
wow,
I thought something had fallen up on the flight deck, and then I heard the sound of the jet engines, because you don't hear it till after the kaboom. Then you hear the jet engines.
That's crazy.
And let's go back to the fuel. We would have to, at sea, you wanted to have the most amount of gas you could all the way to the hop. You would set up what's called a fuel ladder, on your kneeboard card, and you would say, okay, it didn't matter what time you're taking off, it mattered what time you thought you were going to land, and you work back every 15 minutes and what gas you thought you wanted on the ball. You'd talk about that. It was pretty standard. And then you would say, okay, at max conserve, how much I have. And the whole hop, you would compare how much the minimum one you should have on your ladder compared to what you actually have. And if you had anything extra, you could play. You could go buzz the ship, or you could fight each other. But my whole career, you were what's called hanging on the blades, where your throttle's as far back as you could have it. So the Tomcat's basically flying along at its most slowest efficient speed for fuel burn. And then you would set, so many pounds per side to save the gas. But Desert Shield and Desert Storm, all of a sudden, Air Force tankers were everywhere. That was the only time in my whole career that ever happened. And you could take all the gas you wanted, burn all the gas you wanted. And we were raging around that place for a good 8 months. Doing low levels, flying at tactical speeds. We never knew what that was like before. That was a whole new experience for us.
Let's talk story. Any cat stories for me, or close calls?
Oh, God.
Well, he's got one where he left the airplane.
How many? Do you want to hear about my ejection real quick?
Yeah.
When we were, this happened in December 1981, December 19th. I'll never forget the date. We were coming back to a land on the carrier during the daytime, totally normal flight. We touched down on the carrier, and you can catch any one of the 4 cables, and the one we caught was not set to the correct weight. And so it slowed us down, and then all the machinery broke. And so our F-14 went off the end of the flight deck, and we had to eject as it was going over the side. So I got to tell you, I mean, when you pull the handle, you know, the canopy comes off and then seats fire out by rockets. And it was really cool.
Wow.
And in my case, okay, so and then I'll hand it over to Dave because I'm sure he's got something. But in my case, when you're flying around and you have an emergency, I always hated when you're up there with an emergency trying to solve the problem and hoping you don't mess up, etc. So when I ejected, it happened in an instant. And so there's no time to get all nervous or anything. It's just like, oh, eject, pull the handle. Next thing you know, you're swimming in the ocean.
So the canopy went all the way back.
Canopy blew off. It's got explosive bolts that hold it, that attach it to the plane. It blew off, and then the seats fired automatically. First, the canopy clears. The back seat fires a half second later, and then we ended up in the water. Now, when I got in the water, I got tangled up in my parachute and had to cut myself out. I mean, it was quite an adventure.
Wow!
But we survived.
Did you experience time compression?
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, so Coach, have you ever been in a car accident?
One.
Okay, did everything slow down and you start to have a bunch of thoughts and all that? Okay,
yes.
That happened to me as soon as we hit that cable. And as soon as, I mean, I just instinctively knew something was wrong as soon as it slowed us down and then it released. And so I'm rolling down the flight deck and I'm just having a bunch of thoughts in my brain and I'm trying to decide if we need to eject, et cetera. And this all happened in 1 second. And then we did eject. So,
wow.
And that story is told in this book, my first book. It's told, you know, in a blow by blow, second by second account. And my pilot and I were very lucky the way it turned out. And the reason it happened was the guy who was supposed to do that was untrained. The guy who was supposed to set the cable on the weight, he was untrained and unsupervised. So everybody was happy that no one was killed. And, you know, I was happy that I survived.
It's very similar to Leekster's story. Did you hear the Leekster video a couple weeks ago? Yeah, because but he was able to get out of there in time without getting out of the plane. So it was pretty gnarly.
Well, yeah, when he was talking about going off the cat, and the problem for me at night was when you're on the flight deck, you have a lot of references. There's, you know, even at night, there's references. But when you get fired off those bow cats, you go into inky blackness. And one of the first things they do at flight school is they train you not to trust your ears. And they'll put you on a spool and blindfold you, and they'll spin you one way, then the other. And then you're supposed to say which way you're going. And then when they're done, you'll be pointing this way and you're really turning the other way. So you can get vertigo real easy, and you go off the cat and all the fluid went back because in less than 2 seconds, you've gone from 0 to whatever they set your end speed at. It's usually 150, 160, somewhere in there. And I mean, it's like Star Wars. It's just like, blah, lights, and then all of a sudden black. And your head does it, and you're trying to stare at the gauges and hope and they lag a little bit. And that was the Rio's job, is just stare at the airspeed and the altitude, and make sure that the airspeed was above 100 and that your altitude was increasing, not decreasing. So that Rio really had nerves of steel, because I'm sure the way he described it, he went below the flight deck, and that's only 70 feet high. So you only have so much margin. There's a thing called ground effect that should help you a little bit, but if you're not going fast enough, that's not going to help you. So
I used to say that a night cat shot was an act of faith.
Yeah.
And for the first few seconds, it's like, what? I hope we're still alive. And then you go, we're still alive. Okay.
Because the cat throws you back, and you have to lean forward to keep your head from hitting the back of the ejection seat. And then when you hit the end of the catapult stroke, then you get thrown forward because you slowed down, because now you're thrown forward. And now your head has no idea what is going on. And if you're in the bolter pattern and you're turning, it's really easy to get vertigo. In fact, vertigo is so dangerous that you're not even allowed to say the word over the radio, right, Dave? You're not even allowed to
Wow.
say it because you could. I guess they think everybody's going to get it if you say it.
Well, see, I had an experience. I had a single engine cat shot where we didn't just have a burner blowout. We lost the engine. The main shaft failed, and so the RPM was going down to 0 as we went down the cat. But the good thing was it was daytime, and my pilot, who was Petro, was on the ball. I mean, he was on top of the situation, and he stepped on the rudder so much that overcompensated, and we came off the cat, and we had a settle, and it just felt so strange. And my first thing was, Petro, what are you doing? He goes, lost an engine. I got it. I go, oh, okay, you're doing a great job. But I was gonna go, what the hell kind of a cat shot is that? Because you can't tell in the back seat that he lost an engine.
So we have a comment.
We did fine. Go.
Do you see the comment?
Is he talking about the effect of vertigo?
I would assume so.
So I would say yes and no. Usually I think it's harder for the guy or lady in the back to handle a lot of stuff because they don't know what the pilot's going to do. The more experienced you are, the more you can anticipate things. But of course, the more experienced you are, the less experienced the person in the front cockpit is. So you can't always predict what they're going to do. And I can think of one exception that by the time I was in Desert Storm, I was a very senior lieutenant commander. I was a strike lead. So I was flying with the most junior guys in the squadron. And I had one guy that whenever we fenced in, that means leave Saudi Arabia, go into Iraq. You have to do these mild jinks because they're trying to track you to shoot AAA missiles at you. So you're always doing these mild jinks. Well, usually it's easier to handle G. It's easier to handle everything if you got your hand on stick. Well, he got airsick just from doing that.
Oh.
I'm like, fine,
That's rare for a pilot to get airsick.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. But I think he was very nervous. In fact, any day you would either go into Iraq and get shot at the whole time, or you would go out on the CAP station, that's Combat Air Patrol, over the Red Sea, and you'd protect the carrier and the flanks of all the coalition forces. And those were like, nice days at the beach. You're just flying this orbit all day, getting a little sun. And, you had your radar looking at the threat sector, but, it was pretty benign. So that was a nice restful thing. He says, hey, I'm ready to just fly CAP. I'm not ready for that stuff. Because everybody's talking on the radio. He was just overwhelmed. And he was still a JG. He was just overwhelmed at first. Because it was like a rush hour, all these airplanes from all these different countries just going in and out and trying to keep track of all that stuff. And it was hard for me as a strike lead to listen to all my guys, listening to 2 different radios, and everybody's just talking nonstop. Even though they're supposed to have calm discipline, there was a lot of chatter on the radio.
So, Bio, you have your plane there. You can do a demo on the F-14.
What, this one here?
Yes.
I'll tell you a couple of things about the F-14. One is, and some people ask this question, the wing sweep is automatic based on Mach number. And in fact, the computer that controlled that was the world's first microprocessor. It's documented on Wikipedia. And so when you take off and land, the wings were all the way forward for slow speed flight. And then as you accelerated, the wings swept back. And then the pilot had the option, he could manually sweep the wings back if he wanted to. And there were several reasons why he would want to do that. One, it looked cool. So if you're taking pictures, you might sweep them back. Other times when you're coming into the airfield, you sweep the wings back so that when you turn, I mean, you're going very fast anyway, but when you turn, you get more drag with the wings swept back. Another thing about the Tomcat, it had this big bubble canopy. And I recall reading this. Hey, Joe, I don't know if you probably studied stuff like this, but when I was a teenager, I just studied everything about airplanes. This was the first American fighter since the Korean War to have 360-degree visibility.
Wow.
So you could see directly behind you through the tails. I mean, all kinds of things. It carried up to 8 missiles. It had giant horizontal stabilizers that helped it maneuver, especially when it wanted to pitch like that. Is that a good enough demo?
Let's talk afterburners for those of you who don't know what afterburner is.
I loved afterburners.
Woohoo!
The afterburner is a device that many fighter aircraft have on their engines. It squirts raw fuel into the exhaust, into the engine exhaust, and ignites it. And a flame comes out. And on the F-14, if you're if you're flying and you light the afterburners, that flame will be about 40 feet long.
Wow!
And it looks really cool.
Yes. And it had the F-14A, which had the original TF-30 engines, had 5 stages of afterburner. And as the pilot moved the throttle into each stage, it would throw more fuel in, and you'd feel this kick, which was pretty cool. The bigger engines that came later didn't characterize it as stages like that. But
and if you look closely, you can see those structures in there. Those are governed by the laws of physics, and we call them shock discs or shock diamonds or Mach diamond, whatever.
Yeah.
And they really looked cool in real life. I mean, it was just, you could see that flame sitting out there, and it wasn't like a flickering candle flame. It was like, in my opinion, and Dave, I've spent time thinking about this. In my opinion, it was like a solid structure. You know, it's more like a blowtorch. It's like a solid structure, very stable, and it had these structures in it as the gases decelerated. Just very cool.
It was pretty bright, especially like that was a pretty nice picture. That's one of Dave's pictures, because we've talked about it before. The lighting had to be just right. Couldn't be too dark.
Yeah,
but it had to be dark enough. And when those afterburners were lit like that, it was like it reminded me of being downtown in the city with neon lights, because the lights would, even though I'm looking forward, it's lighting up the whole cockpit.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
In thrust we trust.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's my favorite hashtag. Next to plane porn, of course. Yeah, well, if you do hashtag plane porn, you'll see nothing but planes. It won't be I haven't seen the other stuff. So
hopefully a lot of Tomcats.
So let's talk squadrons, guys.
Dave, what squadron were you in?
Well, when I showed up in the RAG, I just happened to be thrown into a class with 2 Phantom squadrons that had just come back from cruise. They were giving up their Phantoms, and they were going to transition to Tomcats. And there was only one pilot, brand new pilot, one Rio in my class, and they started competing to see, they're like, well, we're going to have priority, so we're going to grab you. And, so it was the VF-33 Starfighters and the VF-102 Diamondbacks. But they picked up on, even though Dave and I wrote books, before I did that, before I did photography, I was an artist. And so I designed a T-shirt for the RAG. And the skipper knew it. And he says, hey, would you like to design our markings? And I, like Dave, I read everything I could about the Tomcat. I had Lou Drendel's book. It was only like one book out there on the Tomcat called Lou Drendel's Tomcats in Action. And I had looked at all the Tomcat markings. I was very familiar with them. And they all had, a lot of the early squadrons, even some that Dave were in, had these VF2 had the Langley stripe, this diagonal stripe, red, white, and blue on the side of it.
Stripe down here.
Yeah. Okay. And the Peking Dogs picked up on that. The Aardvarks picked up on that. And VF-84 picked up on that. And I said, well, there isn't any place to put our diamonds, because the Diamondbacks were normally really big on the side of the Phantom. We didn't have on the Tomcat. So I studied the Tomcat. And I said, well, I think I'll just do diamond, a slash with the diamonds in it. So I did a little painting. I got to design the markings, which I thought was really cool. And by then I was a full lieutenant and fairly senior compared to the other guys, but my hours were division. So these guys, the Diamondbacks, grabbed me and decided to keep me. And so I did 2 back-to-back tours as a Diamondback. So I had 6 years as a Diamondback. I had 3 deployments, 2 North Atlantics, and I caught up in the hours. And so I had a lot of time. Later, I became a swordsman in VF-32, which I was very proud of. But Diamondbacks were my first squadron. It's where my first love was. And, really enjoyed that squadron. They're like football teams, you get used to the markings of teams, and there's a lot of, especially with your sister squadron, you got 2 Tomcats on a carrier, and you're hot. You compete on everything. You compete mainly for the sorties, like how many airplanes fly every day, and every time you launch, if you're say you're going to launch 3 Tomcats or 2 Tomcats, there's always a spare. And what you hope that is the sister squadron's airplane goes down and your spare gets to launch, because then you're way up on them, and skippers' careers are based on that, right, Dave?
Yep.
So, but you compete for who has the most camaraderie. You'll compete on anything. You compete with each other, but you mainly compete. It's like the old Arab thing, me against my brother, but me against the father, and then against the tribe, and against whatever, the clan, but that you'll work together with your sister squadron, but you really are competing with those guys.
Oh yeah, your rivalries at every opportunity. Yeah.
And you tried to steal their mascot too. That's the ultimate.
Oh yeah.
You steal their mascot, and then you exact a price out of them, or you just torture them.
So my first squadron was VF-24, and I actually just got a
VF-24
nice shirt. And I was there. Okay. I was there when I was a lieutenant. I got there as an ensign, and I stayed there for 3.5 years. I did 2 deployments, and when I left, I had more than 1,000 F-14 flight hours. So I flew a lot in my first 3.5 years. Then I went to be a Topgun instructor, which I was very fortunate to be selected for that, and then returned to F-14 community in VF-2. Fighter Squadron 2 Bounty Hunters. And then later in my career, I was the commanding officer of VF-211, the Fighting Checkmates. So I was, Coach, I got to tell you, I was fortunate because, a lot of guys put in a lot of effort, and my timing was good, and my effort was recognized, et cetera. So I felt like I was very fortunate to get to do that stuff.
Wow. So we have 5 minutes left. I would go probably 2 hours with you guys. Yeah, one of my shows, I want to go full blown with you guys, maybe next month or in January, and just kind of focus a couple hours or hour and a half. Because as you know, I have a big love for the airplane, and definitely.
I don't know if 2 hours is enough. You might need us on every day for a week. And then
whatever you say, I'm game. So let's talk. Who inspired you to become a Rio?
I cannot think of a specific person. I've been I've been thinking about this for 15 years or more. It's just something that popped into my head when I was a kid. But my parents did, encourage that, and also I was in junior ROTC in high school, so I got encouragement at a lot of turns. So, hey Joe, did you have somebody?
Well, I didn't sign up to be a Rio. I signed up to be a pilot. And the whole time I was in the Marine Corps, I was in a pilot pipeline. And when I came over to the Navy, I went down to Pensacola to be a pilot. By then, I was like in my mid-20s after all these delays. And I got down there, and they said, well, your left eye is not good enough anymore. And so I'd met enough Rios in the Pentagon, because I had a whole year in the Pentagon, and I got to meet Randy Cunningham, the Navy's ace, and his Rio. And I'm like, I'll be a Rio. Okay. I put in a request for a waiver, but I'm like, I think my odds just got better to get in a Tomcat, because boy, the pilots were really, killing each other to get Tomcats and having become Surgrass and stuff. But it's funny, Rio is a naval flight officer. Not all the naval flight officers want to fly Tomcats, right, Dave? A lot of them wanted to fly Intruder.
Yeah, A6s and P3s. Guys wanted to fly P3s.
Yeah, they just all guys that like fine wines, I guess, are, the P3 has its own. But and every once in a while, there'd be somebody that wanted to be a mole in the back of an E2, and they were different.
Yep.
Important, but different.
But there were people that, that wanted to do all the different missions and for good reasons. They just totally different kind of flying. In my case, I was fighters from the beginning. Like Dave, he didn't want to be a Rio. I didn't want to be a Rio, but my eyesight went bad when I was in college. And so I had to shift. And I tell you, it was more than I could have ever imagined. The life of being in Navy fighter squadrons and all that, it's just more than I could have imagined.
There was certainly a lot to do in that back seat.
Yeah, but living in a fighter squadron, it's like, God, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk shout outs. Let's shout out to Snodgrass and Taco.
Hi, Taco. Snodgrass, which Snodgrass?
Dale.
Hello, Snort.
Tell your story of him.
I don't really have a Snort story. I met him a couple of times, but Hey Joe might have one.
I was fortunate that his widow asked me to speak at his celebration of life in St. Augustine in September. He had one in New Mexico where the fighter community turned out in force, but she was having another one at his home, his winter home, and there was only going to be 4 or 5 Tomcat guys there, but a lot of the air show people, Paddy Wagstaff, all the legendary air show people were going to be there. And she said, I really want somebody on the Tomcat community to speak. Would you do it? Because I'm on the F-14 Association board, so I was already talking to her about getting her up for our 50th reunion, which will be in April, late April next year. And she agreed to come, so we're going to have her up for that. And so I brought a big banner and got to talk to him. And everybody knew he was on the East Coast because he was one of the masters of Spank. And that was Snort. It was Roy Flash Gordon and Okie Nance. And they routinely took on the F-15s out of Langley and spanked them hard.
Wow.
And, the F-15s were like always, talking ever since the movie Top Gun came out. They actually put an article saying, well, that Tomcat's not so tough. So Flash called him up and said, okay, send your 2 best. And we're going to send a RAG student out with me. And they went out and engaged him. And Flash was actually behind an F-15, so can I get on camera, gunning him, and with the flaps down, which is not really authorized, but the Master Spank all knew how to do it, and actually coughed an engine. So now he's single engine gunning the F-15, gunning his brains out. And they had to apologize for writing the article. It was a young guy that had written it. But so I knew Snort from that reputation, flew with him. And then I got to work with him. After I retired, I worked in getting the lantern pod on the Tomcat, and I was the deep throat guy that came down from DC once a week and sat with him in his office when he was the Commodore and talked about how we were going to get the lantern on the airplane. So I had a lot of my life, even in the Navy and outside the Navy, had intersected with Snort quite a bit. And I been talking to him right up to the week before he died,
Wow.
So considered him a friend, really close friend, and tremendous loss to everyone. He was
Thank you for sharing that.
very special, the high time guy in the community, almost 5,000 hours in the airplanes.
Wow.
Incredible.
Wow. So I need to go back to Taco. So Tall Tales with Taco Bell on YouTube. And because of Taco, I actually met Bio. And because of the whole community of F-14, I met Hey Joe. So I'm so grateful to be connected to your community. Thank you so much, guys.
Sure thing, Cindy. Thanks for having us today.
That's Coach to you.
Coach.
Yeah.
So 1 minute out, and just say something about the F-14 and why your career as a F-14 Rio was so epic, marking off that bucket list.
I'll say that the F-14 was a legend for many reasons: capability, image, the fact that it truly inspires many people. And for my whole life, I'm proud that I was able to be a part of the community.
Hey, Joe.
It was a great chapter or two or more in my life. And, you know, there was a lot of stuff you had to put up with. You know, you couldn't fly all day long, but just those moments. I cannot fathom being on an aircraft carrier unless you could get in a Tomcat and roar off the deck and go flying. Even there's some of the close moments at night in black inky sea and you couldn't land for whatever reason. It was still just, I was so glad to be there. And, you know, I would have done it for longer if it worked out, but you know,
Oh yeah,
I had to grow up and get a job.
All right. Shout out your Facebook pages, and then I'll put you in the green room. I'll close out, and we'll chat for a few.
My Facebook page is Top Gun Days. It's the easiest way to find me on Facebook. Top Gun Days.
I have my personal page, David Parsons, but I also maintain the F-14 Association group on Facebook, and one called Bandits, which is a book I wrote, and I have another one, Hellbent for Leather, which is about the leather flight jacket like this. Awesome. It's not anything else. And I have a few others.
Disappointed people show up now and then. Huh?
Yeah.
I thought this
yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay, right, I'll say hi to Rabies also. Hi, Rabies.
I'm going to pop you in the green room and just hang tight for 1 minute, and I'll talk to you in a few. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Coach.
So go here in the chat. You can follow both of these amazing Rios. You definitely need to get learning more about the F-14. There's so much to learn, and there's so many communities about it. And later on today at 3 o'clock, you're going to learn about the fan group that we have for Top Gun, the movie. So next on the show, I have my friend Dick, and he is from the Oshkosh Air Show. It is a bucket list that you need to mark off. I'm actually doing it next July. I'm going to be turning 57, and I am super stoked. It is one of the largest air shows in the nation, and I cannot wait to mark that off my list. So this is Cindy Shaka. We'll see you in the next show.